Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. Monster I carried out of the woods. I found a monster in the woods. Every year I spend a week in the woods alone. I cannot stand being inside my empty house on the anniversary of when I lost everything important in my life. The walls close in on me, and I feel suffocated. So, I go to the woods. I sleep, drink, and try to shoot at least one deer. On the second day of my trip, I was walking through the forest in damp weather feeling miserable when I came across it. A creature hanging by its foot from a tree. I panicked when I first saw the figure strung up in the tree and rushed forward hoping if it was a person I could still help. As I got closer, I saw that even though its body was similar to a human, all the proportions looked wrong. The legs far too long and skinny. The stomach sunken in, rib cage visible making it seem like it had no muscle mass or fat. I stopped below the creature, staring up at it in disbelief of what I was seeing. One foot was stuck inside a bear trap that was attached to a chain, hooked over a branch. Its entire body was hanging from a torn and bloody ankle snared inside the trap. Wrists tied together and arms so long they nearly reached the ground as they dangled past its head. The creature's face was covered by a blank wooden oval with moss spilling out from it. At first, I was certain it was dead. As I got closer, I saw the chest rise weakly as if let out small wheezing breaths from under the mask. Even without seeing what was under the mask, I knew this thing wasn't human. The woods had a bad reputation of people going missing. Most didn't like camping overnight inside the forest anymore. It was a good place to fish and hunt but not to stay the night. I had my hunting rifle with me. I could put it out of its misery. Or just left it alone. Someone put this thing here. They might be back for it. Misty rain came down and I could see puff of my breath in the terrible weather. My feet cold and fingers stiff. It would get dark in a few hours. I should go back to my camp and get dry or else I would get sick. Or leave this damned forest before any more of these creatures came for me. Instead, I did something only an insane person would. I placed my gear on the ground to climb the tree to get the creature down. It was the middle of the night when the creature stirred. I'd treated the wounds the best I could. Getting the bear trap off without cutting my hand took almost an hour to do. Dragging the lanky thing back to camp worn me out and I still needed to dry the creature off and wrap up its wounds. The damn thing better appreciate what I did for it. While I waited for it to wake up, I sat by the fire, sitting under a tarp to keep dry. I let the monster I'd dragged back use my tent, keeping the flap open so I could keep an eye on it. I was dead tired but didn't want to fall asleep with whatever the thing was close by to eat me in my sleep. Its limbs were so long I had to fold them to make sure it fit inside my small tent. At some point in the middle of the night I heard movement in my tent. Slowly a hand came out, long fingers testing the damp ground. I couldn't see the thing's expression because of the mask and moss covering its entire head. Even while it slept, I didn't dare look what it really looked like. I remained still, wrapped up in my spare blanket. If it attacked, I could shoot it but I didn't even reach for my rifle. Half of the creature's body came out of the tent, body freezing up when it sensed me nearby. The next few seconds were tense. Neither of us moved, waiting for the other to act first. I'd hoped this would be a treat and release process. That when this creature woke up, it would just go back off into the woods. I was not so lucky. It made the choice to attack the easy target. Darting forward, it cleared the distance between us quickly. I was knocked over, thin bony hands pinning me down to the ground. The mask flipped up so fast I never saw what was underneath. Sharp teeth grabbed a hold of my jacket and started to shake it, tearing the fabric, but not reaching my skin. The attack didn't last very long. I was fully ready to accept my death in that moment. After all, I had nothing waiting for me outside of that forest. If I could become food, at least my death would mean something. But this creature didn't even give me that. It stopped, releasing my coat and staggered back. Collapsing on its side, it let out ragged wheezing breaths. It used up all its strength in that thin body. I watched it, wondering what to do next. I grabbed a blanket from my tent, trying to wrap it up to keep the creature warm. It weakly pushed my hands away, sharp claws catching my coat but not tearing it. Wrapping the thing very much like a burrito, I went about getting it back inside the tent. I couldn't see the creature's expression, but I could sense how annoyed my new campmate was being manhandled and wrapped up. Until it regained some strength, it would need to accept some help. I went back outside, wrapped myself in my own blanket again and stared back into the weak fire. I planned on staying up all night, but I drifted between sleep until dawn came. Out in the trees I heard sounds. As if someone was walking around in the dark just beyond my camp. Fear fluttered in my stomach. I was out in the open, exhausted from the cold weather. I didn't mind death. But I was still afraid of whatever was stalking around in the night. When morning arrived, I looked around the camp to find someone, or something had in fact been circling my camp. Muddy tracks and broken twigs gave me enough evidence of being watched. I wondered if it was more of those creatures waiting to grab the injured on inside the tent. At least I lived through one night so far. My new guest was out of the tent when I got back to camp. It wrapped in a blanket, glaring at me from under the mask. I could feel the eyes on me, even if I couldn't see them. I needed to think of what to do next. I could just pack up and leave. I doubted these things would follow me into the city. It still wasn't healed up and wouldn't be able to protect itself if whoever hung it up came back. Trying to get the creature to eat, it had no interest in the hot dogs and marshmallows I brought. It was a little surreal seeing a lanky creature like it in the dim gray morning light. This thing wasn't human, and yet I was helping it for reasons I didn't know. Aside from people, this thing might eat other meat. If I could shoot some game, maybe a good meal would help it gain some strength back. And maybe for all my trouble I would be eaten in the end. Only time would tell how thankful this thing would be for all the help. I didn't want to go off into the forest hunting alone. If another person came across my camp, I didn't want them to come across my monster. One of them would end up dead if that happened. I paced, trying to think of what to do. As if it could sense my train of thought, the lanky creature bundled the blanket, putting it inside the tent to stay dry. Then, it climbed up my back, lanky limbs wrapping around me. My skin crawled and stood, back bent, trying to support the sudden weight change. I waited for the attack that never came. We just awkwardly stood there waiting on each other to do something. I could go hunting if I carried the creature on my back. It would take longer than normal, but could be done. Picking up my rifle and small pack, I started off into the trees, still really creeped out by the thing that I decided to help. At least it wasn't trying to eat me. I really needed to call the creature on my back something. Naming things was difficult. I went through at least 100 while sneaking through the woods, trying to pick up on any game tracks. I didn't know what it was beside not human. Skinwalker and Wendigo just didn't suit what it was from what I've heard about them. No legends or cryptid name felt right. Soon I found myself not caring if I had the name of its species. I doubted humans even came across them often enough to give it a name. I was startled out of my thoughts when I came right up on a deer. A decent-sized buck that should have run before I even got this close. Holding my breath, I froze, hand on my rifle. Careful to make as little noise as possible, I raised my weapon to get my shot lined up. For a moment I wondered what I was doing was even right. This thing I was taking care of could be evil. The missing person cases was a hint towards that. Then again, it might just be a part of nature. Killing a deer to feed the creature wouldn't be wrong if this is what happened in the woods without me interfering. I shot twice for good measure. The buck fell with a grunt of surprise. The thing on my back dropped to the ground moving like liquid. It sulked towards the fallen creature, masked face darting around as if it expected something was going to swoop in and take its food. While watching it eat, I decided on a name in the worst way possible. I've seen videos of what a fox sound like. Those nightmare screeches and sounds were the same kind this creature made while it tore into the deer and ate. Because its back was turned to me, I never saw its face. Just the fact the mask was lifted so it could bite and tear off chunks of flesh. Fox felt like a suitable name for the monster I'd taken in. Fox, I said mostly to myself, trying the name out. The creature slightly turned at my voice, letting me see a human-looking mouth, but filled with bloody sharp teeth. I think he liked the name. Fox ate through the entire deer with insane speed. Even after devouring through pounds of meat, he was still skinny enough for me to see his rib cage. It was a mystery where he put it all. Gathering up the larger bones, he followed behind me back to the camp. At least he could walk now, although limping and trailing behind. He crawling mostly on all fours even though he was holding bones in his hands. I led him to the river first so he could get cleaned up in the cold water, and I refilled some of my bottles to boil later. When we arrived back at camp, Fox gnawed on a rib while reluctantly letting me look at his injured ankle. It healed so much I knew he would be fine by tonight or tomorrow. Watching him chew though his bone stash, I wondered yet again what I was doing. Not only did I not leave him to die, I'd named him. There was something seriously wrong with me if I could get attached to a creature like this. You can eat me, you know. I told him, not knowing if he knew what I was saying. Fox looked over at my voice but didn't pause in his gnawing. Bone under his moss blanket covering his face. Strangely enough, I wasn't scared of him. I'd already accepted my death for a while now. If he wanted to eat me next, I would almost welcome it. The rest of the day I let him wander around camp, and I kept the fire going and took a few short naps to catch up on sleep. When night fell, the fear of death finally came to me. I was inside the tent while Fox stayed beside the fire. I'd heard noises from outside and carefully crawled out from my sleeping bag to try and see the source. It sounded like a few people walking just outside where the firelight could reach. Fox tensed up, looking ready to attack if needed. I found my rifle, taking it into my hand as silently as I could. My eyes adjusted to the darkness and I could faintly see forms similar to Fox moving around in the trees. There was more of whatever he was in this forest. I stood waiting for them to make a move, rifle pointing downward. I didn't want to shoot one if they only showed up to pick up a missing member of their pack. One was brave enough to poke its head into the light. It was low to the ground, lanky elbows pointing up. It also had a blank wooden mask, but it had a mane of tangles branches covering the upper half of its body. For a second, I thought I spotted glowing eyes inside that heap of wood staring daggers at me. Well, go on, I whispered to Fox, trying to encourage him to go and rejoin his group. Almost like cats, they got closer to each other on all fours, backs arched, studying and doing a half circle around each other. Other creatures appeared, watching the exchange, each having a mask of wood with some sort of pile of forest debris covering their faces. Some stood on two legs, making them almost 8 feet tall, other on all four, ready to swiftly run forward if startled. It looked like it was going well. Fox got closer to the other creature and reached a clawed hand over as a gesture I didn't understand. In a blink of an eye, they both flew into a flurry of motion. Horrible hissing and garbling cries came from the tangled pair, thrashing, trying to kill each other. My heart sank and a pit of black fear opened up my stomach. Fox healed up a bit since he was with me, but he wasn't strong enough to fight off the newcomer, let alone all the ones in the woods watching. I accepted I would die, but I was not able to let Fox die with me. I lifted my rifle and aimed it away from the fight. I fired it off into the woods, aiming at nothing. I hoped the sound would make them stop, and it worked. The one creature stopped to look around for the sound. Fox kicked the other aside and scrambled to me as I ran over and stood between him and the other pale form. The newcomer was covered in scratches, dripping in blood. Fox looked worse. His arm broken and countless cuts on his thin body from the brief fight. Getting between them, I received a fast long cut to my arm, but it was nothing compared to what Fox went through. I pointed the rifle towards the monster on all fours, ready to fire if needed. It stared at me from behind that faceless mask. The other creatures didn't move. I heard Fox shuffling around behind me, but I didn't turn to see what he was doing. When the other creature turned its head away from me to watch Fox, I finally did the same. He'd taken off the faceless wooden mask from his hood of moss and tossed it into the fire in front of all of us. The wood gave off a high-pitched shrieking sound as if it was an animal dying. Black flames shot up, spewing into the sky for a few seconds until the noise died down. The mask was burned up completely. Fox sat next to the fire, nursing his bad arm. Slowly the creatures around us started to leave one by one until the one that attacked Fox remained. It sat, blood dripping from its wounds. Finally, it too, turned and left us. My arm bleeding and rifle feeling heavy. Dropping my weapon, I collapsed to my knees. Caring about someone else was beyond stressful. White-hot pain started to come through my body from my cut. I found my arm was too heavy to move to see how deep the wound was. Trying to stand, my legs suddenly refused to work. Not knowing why, I fainted into a deep sleep I didn't awake from until it was morning. When I opened my eyes, I was inside my tent on my side. My arm out front of me so I could see the wound was stuffed with moss. I felt hot and too weak to move, or do anything at all. I couldn't even move my fingers. Pain came in waves as I tried to ignore it. Focusing on anything but the throbbing in my arm, I listened to the pattering or rain outside. The light was gray and impossible to tell what time it was. The tent flap open, letting cool air and misty rain come inside the tent. Fox must have been the one to put me in here, but he didn't know how zippers worked. My energy fading, I fell asleep again. The next few days I knew I was dying. Whatever got into my cut was nasty. That creature easily being able to kill with one strike of its claws. I slept most of the time, far too weak and feverish to move. Fox would keep me hydrated by lifting my head to let me drink from my steel water bottle I brought along. But the water tasted muddy. He was getting it from the river, not knowing to boil it. His efforts might just kill me faster. In my fevered dreams I was tormented by the truth that haunted my every waking hour. The reason why I wanted death so badly, even though I was too much of a coward to do it myself. I wasn't there to hear the car accident, but was still plagued by the sounds. My mind repeated the sound of the officer knocking on my door at 4 in the morning to awkwardly tell me the news. His first time saying such tragic words to another person. And I knew it was all my fault. 5 years ago, I cheated on my wife. A one-night fling. I did not have a good reason aside from I just felt like it. I told her knowing I would be unable to hide it. She very understandably got upset and left the house to her brother's place 4 blocks away. They both drank and insulted me. Something I rightfully deserved. To this day, I don't know why they decided to drive back home that night. She was too drunk to drive, but her brother thought he was fine. It was only 4 blocks away from our home, and yet they got into a 3-car pileup from people leaving the bar for the night. Everyone in my wife's car died that night. Everyone else in the other cars were lucky enough to receive injuries they could recover from. 3 people died. My wife, her brother, and our daughter in the back seat of the car. I went to sleep when she left and wasn't even aware she took our daughter to her brother's place with her. All because I made one decision to go home with a woman I thought was attractive. A whim killed 3 people. I needed to live with that fact for the rest of my life. Delirious from the fever, I could barely keep my eyes open. I saw Fox sitting next to me, his form blurry in my weak state. I couldn't handle falling back asleep and hearing my daughter was gone again. Please. Kill me. I begged him in a voice barely above a whisper. He didn't react for a long time. The longer I looked, the more I noticed he was slightly different. More human. His proportions not as lanky as before. He leaned in and I saw instead of the moss covering his face he replaced it with torn-up fabric that was once my clothing. He didn't keep it together with glue or thread. My tired brain wondered how the heaps of cloth stayed on his head. Reaching over he took my arm, now red and infected from the cut. It caused a jolt of pain that almost knocked me out again to rattle my bones. Lifting my hand to his covered face, Fox lifted some of the rags to reveal a mouth of sharp teeth. Without any hesitation he took my pinky finger off in one bite. I let out a soft scream, struggling to stay awake. Letting my hand drop, his long fingers came into view moving directly to my throat. Darkness overtook me. I died. Fox choked the life out of me. Then, he gave some back. It's something beyond anything I could ever understand of how it happened. And I don't think I ever need to fully understand it. I woke up, scar on my arm, feeling better than I had in years. Aside from being stiff, my illness left me. I was still inside my tent, rain softly hitting against the outside. Looking to my side, a bundle of blankets was taking up most of the space. Peeking under them, Fox was curled up. He moved from his nest being disturbed but didn't wake up. I left him alone, climbing out of the tent trying to get the kinks out of my back. It was still damp, but I was glad to be in the cool air outside. A few minutes passed after I came out and I took stock of everything. My pinky was still gone but wound healed along with the cut on my arm. Aside from my clothing being torn apart by Fox, nothing else touched the camp while I was out of commission. I was wondering what I should do when crunching of twigs drew my attention. A pair of men stood wearing raincoats over wet gear. Both with rifles over their shoulders, unable to keep them dry. I thought I saw some chain poking out from one of their overpacked bags. Each seemed as if they were camping for a long time and worn down to the bone. Can I help you with anything? I asked the pair, voice cracking from a dry throat. I knew who they were. Without a doubt they trapped Fox and left him hung up in a tree to die. I wondered if I was going to run into the people who did such a thing and still didn't know how to react when it happened. Have you seen anything strange at night? One asked slowly while looking over my camp. I felt my hands start to shake and forced myself to keep them steady. Nope. Nothing. Terrible weather, don't you think? I'm going to pack up and leave today. I hoped I sounded casual enough. Glancing over I saw Fox sitting up in the tent moving around in the blanket pile silently. From the angle only I was the one who could see him. The two men looked at each other as if trying to decide something. If Fox saw them, would he kill them? Would I let him after what they did? If we let them go back into the forest, these two would kill more of those creatures. I was sure of that. Whatever was in the woods, they hunted them down. And I found that I didn't care. I didn't save Fox because of what he is. I saved him to give myself a reason to keep going. He was special because I'd named him and made him special. They hurt him before he became that. If they left, I wouldn't go after them. But if they dared trying to harm Fox now, I wouldn't hesitate in killing them. Either they were too tired to deal with me, or I looked natural enough for them to believe my lie. All right, take care of yourself, the older one said with a small wave of his hand. I watched as they left, still holding my breath. Fox poked out his head covered in rags directed towards the men who was already gone. Still not too late to go after them. Fox gave them no notice. Do you want to go home? I asked him, not even sure if he could understand me. When I left the woods, I took something with me. A creature that almost looks human now. I sold my house and bought a very small cabin by the lake. I figured it would be better suited for Fox being around woods. He's never spoken to me and I've never seen what face he hides. There is still so much I don't know about the monster I carried out of those woods. The only thing I do know about him is he's now my reason to keep living. I never needed a good one, I just needed something. Second story. This story was shared by you/spaghetti_Mercury. Stay away from the bead ranch. I considered not going to my friend's housewarming party. If I hadn't, I would have never known the horror that was sitting right up the road. I'd have never heard the strange story of the bead ranch. Pronounced BD. Another one of my friends got married. Another one bites the dust. It's become more and more common in recent years. This time, it was my childhood best friend Tiffany. Tiff met Joe days after arriving on campus during her freshman year of college. They fell in love quickly. He seems like a great guy and I get along with him. Shortly after getting married, they found a place relatively closer to where Tiff works. She is extremely intelligent and has a great job. The commute was crazy though. The place was still almost an hour away from her work, which was better than her previous commute. It's about 2 hours from our hometown where I still live. It was a bit of a haul to go to their housewarming party, but I did tell her that I wouldn't miss it for the world. The party was okay and I saw some old friends. I was happy to see that they were happy. They found a nice little place on a lake that they apparently got a great deal on. The party was run-of-the-mill and I didn't care much about it other than hanging out with Tiff and Joe. I decided that I wouldn't drink because I had to work the following morning and would need to drive home that night. I met their new friends who are locals of the area. Andy and Lauren were a friendly couple and they stayed to the end of the night. It was after most everyone had left that they told me the story of a family who lived nearby. A story I initially struggled to believe. Everything was winding down and it was just me, Joe, Tiff, and their new friends from the area, Andy and Laura. We were all sitting in a circle, smoking pot and shooting the shit. You don't care at all what religion the president is? Andy asked the group. Why would I? Tiff laughed. It could be a religion that practices human sacrifice. Andy laughed. Okay. Okay, do you care if the president was gay? What reason would there be to care? I laughed. I couldn't care less who the president wants to get with as long as they're, adult humans. Same way it doesn't matter to me what anyone cares to eat. As long as it isn't human. Well, make sure to stay away from the old Bead Ranch then, Andy replied. Why? I asked. Do they have gay presidents that eat people? Andy was chuckling, but his face turned serious strangely quickly. Laura had a very serious look on her face. You guys haven't heard anything about the Bead Ranch? Andy asked Joe and Tiff. Nothing. Why? Tiff asked. Shit, I'm surprised the realtor didn't say something when you moved in here, Laura said. Oh God. What is it? Joe asked. The Bead family, Laura somberly replied. There was a weirdly tense moment after she said that. Neither Andy or Laura were laughing in the slightest. After a short pause, Laura told us the story. Fay Hollow, the town directly to the west of us just a few minutes down the road, is all owned by this very strange and reclusive family. I think it's considered a hamlet, because it's not big enough to be considered a town. It's basically just a big chunk of land with one old dirt road going through it. From all accounts, it's not very good land either. It's mostly all swamp with a small river that runs off from the lake. People who've been there say it's just ugly. You've never been there? Tiff asked. We know better, Andy replied. Joe and Tiff both looked a little spooked. Laura took a long sip of her drink and then continued. Some years back, the town wanted to build a highway through some of this area. There were plans to build a factory here. They were planning on bringing in new businesses. Most of the people around here were all for it. Outside of the nice houses on the lakes, it's historically been a very low-income area. There just isn't much nearby and there aren't a lot of job opportunities. Yeah, my commute is like an hour now, Tiff said. Still worth it for a nice affordable house on the lake. For those of us who can afford it, Laura said. There are plenty who can't. There were a lot more back then. The population used to be much higher here. Now it's primarily summer homes or people who have really long commutes. Tiff almost looked like she felt guilty or had taken some offense. Laura quickly got back to the story. Most locals were excited about the highway and all of the new businesses that might come. Everyone who needed to sign off on it did, aside from the beads. Locals who would need to move were offered much more than market value for their homes. Most of them felt like they won the lottery. The Beatties wouldn't budge though. Their family had owned that chunk of land for generations. They dug in their heels. People were pissed. Laura paused again to get another drink. So let me guess, the townspeople raced over there with pitchforks and killed them? Joe asked. Now the ghosts haunt the land, he laughed. Was I close? No, but maybe they should have, Andy replied in a serious tone. There was another short but awkward pause before Laura returned and sat back down. So, what happened? Tiff asked. The story starts to get murky, Laura replied. There had already been plenty of rumors about the family. People claimed that they practiced incest. Some believed they were cannibals. These were all theories most likely due to their appearance and their decision to live in isolation. People might have heard about the disappearances, and let their imaginations fill in the blanks. Or maybe they were right about the beads. What locals did know was that anyone who wandered onto their property were greeted with shotguns. So they were just like Florida people. Joe laughed. Laura ignored the comment and continued. The town continued surveying different spots in the area, hoping that they could still convince the beads to sell. 2 men, Thomas and Paul, were sent to the hamlet to survey what they could as well as try again to talk to the family. She continued as we all quietly listened. Thomas has told his story. He checked out the area near the front of the land by the start of the dirt road that runs through the property and acts as a shortcut to the interstate. Paul went into the weeds and bushes so he wouldn't be seen. He was going to check out the swamp. Before long, Thomas heard thrashing followed by gunshots alongside terrible screams. What happened to Paul? Tiff asked. No one knows, Laura replied. Thomas ran out of there and promptly called the cops. They found nothing. No sign of Paul at all. He's still considered missing and presumed dead. Thomas has theorized that Paul had been cannibalized. They could never prove it though. No evidence. Since then, people steer clear of Fay Hollow and the Beatty family. Maybe a bear got him, Joe said. Maybe, Laura replied. There were others though. Some are on record as missing. Some are just stories. But it seems like every few years, someone goes missing near the Bead Ranch. It's enough to make locals steer clear. Is it really a shortcut to the interstate? I asked. It's a straight shot, Andy said. The dirt road ends about a mile from the on-ramp to 86. It would seriously take at least 45 minutes less to get there than the main roads. That's why they wanted to build the highway. I laughed. People really won't take that road because they're afraid of this family. People don't want to get shot, Laura replied. That, or something worse. The stories could have been exaggerated, but the disappearances are very real. What keeps random people driving through from going down that road? I asked. The turn to the road is at the end of a road with a dead-end sign at the entrance. There isn't a reason for most people to go down there. There's also no trespassing and posted signs everywhere leading to it. I had friends who went down there and took pictures. It's really creepy. The dirt road doesn't fully show up in the maps either, so most people don't know that it goes to the interstate if they're not from here, Laura replied. Your friends went to the ranch? Joe asked. Just to the edge of the road, Laura replied. They knew not to go any further, not to trespass. Kids at school called it the Bleedy Ranch. Sounds like those Bleedies stand their ground. Joe laughed. Something like that, Laura quietly replied. I was very skeptical. I asked them, have you guys ever seen this family? Just the youngest one, Andy replied. She used to come in about once a week when I was working at the gas station up the road. Bought a lot of gas. She's actually pretty cute, in an Amish sort of way. That's messed up, Laura said, looking mildly irritated. Not as cute as you. Andy laughed. No, I'm talking about how people think she might have been kidnapped. The beads don't associate with anyone outside of their family, and she sure doesn't look inbred. Some people think she was kidnapped when she was a baby and raised as a bead. I don't doubt it, Andy replied. The topic of conversation changed shortly after that, but I couldn't stop thinking about this place. Could I really cut 45 minutes off of my drive home? It's such a long, boring drive. It was crazy to me that people would avoid a shortcut like that just because they've seen too many scary movies. About a half hour later, I knew that I needed to leave. I was already looking at a night of very little sleep. I had an important meeting and presentation at work in the morning. Joe and Tiff tried to talk me into staying, but I simply couldn't. Hooray for work. As I reached the top of their long driveway, I stopped for a moment and thought about Fay Hollow. They warned me not to take the shortcut, but they didn't have a long drive ahead of them. I looked it up in maps on my phone. Laura was right about only half the road showing up on there. Looking at the map though, it didn't seem like there was any logical place for it to end aside from where they said it did. My main concern was getting to the end of the road and finding out it didn't actually come out by the interstate. I figured that if the road was a dead end, it would only add an extra 20 minutes or so to my trip. If I had to drive the long way, I wasn't gonna get any sleep either way. I decided to opt for the shortcut. I followed the map to the road with a dead-end sign at the entrance. I started slowly driving down it. It wasn't long before I started seeing no trespassing signs and posted signs on the trees. There weren't any houses on this road, and it seemed to lead straight into a swamp. I got all the way to the end before I saw the turn to Bead Road. The turn was somewhat hidden by weeds and bushes. The cement ended and the dirt road was tough to see in the dark at first. There was a gate, but I could see from the car that it wasn't locked. The gate and surrounding trees were absolutely covered and no trespassing signs. I have to admit that I was a little creeped out. The excessive amount of signs in front of the dark dirt road made me slightly uneasy. As did seeing the sign for Bead Road. This means that the family isn't fictional. I considered it for a minute and decided that the creepiness of the road itself is probably where these stories come from. I remember being a kid and assuming any creepy-looking, boarded-up, or run-down house must be haunted. Sometimes our imagination gets the better of us. Not tonight though. I had come this far and I was taking this shortcut. I got out and walked over to the gate. It was an old rusty X-shaped gate, just big enough to prevent cars from getting through. It creaked loudly as I swung it open. The sound echoed through the eerily quiet night. I admitted to myself that I was a little creeped out, but I still didn't believe Laura's stories. Creepy-looking places spawn creepy stories. Stereotypes can lead to urban myths. Stereotypes like the beads being seen as inbred cannibal rednecks because they live in relative isolation. These are the things I was telling myself as I started driving down the dark dirt road. I kept my speed low because of the wooded areas on each side of the road. The last thing I needed was to hit a deer. The road eventually turned slightly around a bend, and that's when I saw the lights in the distance. I assumed it had to be in their house. Andy and Laura said it was the only one along the road or inside the tiny hamlet. I crept slowly down the road. The lights were growing bigger, but I still couldn't see the house. I started hearing a noise that I eventually recognized as the sound of a generator. These people really were off the grid. I started wondering where they got the money for gas to power the generator, where they got money for food, supplies, etc. Laura would likely say that they stole it from their many victims. While I still didn't believe that, the thought was stuck in my head. I admit that I was feeling more nervous as I got closer to the house. I could see a spot ahead where the weeds and trees opened up. I was almost to the house and I was about to be visible to anyone who might be there. I had freaked myself out a little bit more than I realized before, so I decided to pick up my speed as I was passing the house. I figured that even if they were the type to shoot anyone they saw on their property, I could get past the house before they could even grab their shotguns. I sped up a little as I got to a point where I could be seen from the house. I saw that there was lights on, but didn't spot anyone outside or through the windows. The house was a little shabby, but honestly not much worse looking than my last place. It could use a paint job, but there are worse looking houses in the town I live in. Seeing the house calmed my nerves a bit. It wasn't as spooky as what I built up in my head. Still spooky, just not as spooky as I imagined. I still wanted to get past it and out of sight quickly. I started to pass the house and looked ahead down the long dirt road where the opening in the trees closed up and it was almost too dark to see right in front of you. I pressed the gas a little harder as I passed, then abruptly I felt the steering tighten and the car slow. I had popped a tire. This is what I like to call an of course moment. I quickly hopped out to check the damage. My front right tire was flat. I momentarily considered driving on it at least to the end of the dirt road. Then I thought about it and decided that I might let Laura's story creep me out a bit, but I'm not gonna destroy my rim because of it. I was practically right in front of the house. I might have gotten 10 or 15 feet past it, but the light from the porch made me clearly visible to anyone inside. I looked toward the house regularly as I popped the trunk and grabbed the spare tire. I still hadn't seen any people, but there were definitely lights on inside that I thought that maybe I should call someone, but as I looked at my phone I saw that I had no service. Of course not. I was in a swamp in the middle of nowhere. As I was rolling the tire from the trunk to the front of the car, I spotted something strange on the ground. I used the light from my phone to get a closer look. I felt a chill when I realized what it was. It was a small piece of wood with several nails driven through it. The nails were straight through and unbent, sticking straight up. My tolerance for coincidence was fading. It looked like a man-made item, specifically put there to pop someone's tires. I shined my phone's flashlight a little further up the dirt road and noticed another one, then another, then another. I walked maybe 20 feet ahead and found more than a dozen of these little spike strips, a minefield of pointy objects. The feeling of panic started rapidly growing. I'm not sure if the plan was to jump in the car and drive it on a flat or if I was going to try to change it as quickly as humanly possible. It didn't matter though. When I turned around and looked back toward the house, I noticed a man coming from the house toward me. I could just see his silhouette as he went from walking to running. I quickly realized that he was wielding something and he started to yell. Panic immediately took over. I had idiotically walked too far from my car, so I turned and started running further down the road. I didn't know why they were laying down homemade spike strips and I didn't want to find out. To me, everything else could been chalked up to coincidence. Not the spike strips though. As I started to run, I could hear the man yelling but I couldn't make out what he was saying. My heart was racing and I had no idea where I was going or what I was planning to do. When I looked back, I saw a second man coming out of the house. He was standing directly in the porch light for a moment and I could see clearly that he was holding a rifle. He yelled as well but I couldn't make it out. Then he also started running toward me. I couldn't believe what was happening. I felt stupid for taking the shortcut despite a direct warning not to. I could already feel my sides hurting. I was running short of breath. I had no plan. All I could do was run and hope that the men chasing me either gave up or lost track of me. I considered cutting into the swamp, but I figured they probably knew their way through it better than me and it would only slow me down. I felt helpless. I could hear them continuing to yell and scream as I started to feel like I couldn't run anymore. The only word I could make out was, "Stop." At this point, I wasn't looking back to see if they were gaining on me. I was just trying to force myself to keep running. I tried to fight through the cramps, shortness of breath, sore legs, and dizzy feeling. Then I abruptly felt a sharp pounding pain in each side of my rib cage. I was stopped dead in my tracks as my head and arms flew forward while the rest of my body stopped. Momentarily. It was dark and I couldn't tell what was happening at first. I could only focus on the searing pain I felt. I realized that something was wrapped around my torso. It felt like marble when I touched it. I could barely see it in the dark and in the frenzy, but I could tell that it was large. The pain intensified as I was lifted off of the ground. Whatever had a hold of me flailed me around more than 10 feet off of the ground. I could see the two men had made it almost to me and stopped. The man with the gun began firing shots. I couldn't see what he was shooting at as I was being thrashed around in the dark. After he fired about 3 shots, I was thrown to the ground. The one man was throwing rocks and other random objects. I looked up and saw what had grabbed me. It was unbelievable. I tried to crawl back despite a few likely broken ribs. I looked up to see a massive humanoid creature. It must have been 25 feet tall. It was tough to tell as it was standing in the swamp water. It had a long, skinny body and lanky arms with a kind of claw at the end of each. The claws were like ant mandibles that connected at the tip rather than fitting flush when closed. It was one of those claws that it had grabbed me with. I'm lucky the claw didn't close flush, because I wouldn't be here to tell the story if it had. I continued slowly crawling backward as the two men fought off the creature. As the man with the gun tried to line up a shot, the other flashed a light at the creature. This was the clearest I was able to see it. It had 2 very large eyes that seemed to extend halfway around its oval-shaped head. Its skin was a dark gray or black. Its head was more of a grayish blue. The eyes were black with a fluorescent, thin blue ring around the edges. Everything happened so fast. The man with the gun told the other guy to try and distract the creature with the light as he reloaded. The man flashed the light in the creature's face, then pointed it toward the trees hoping to grab its attention. It didn't work. The next few moments are seared into my brain. I was first distracted by a young woman yelling and running toward us from the house. I continued dragging myself in terror before I looked back. The man with the rifle was attempting to reload when the creature spiked down through his torso with one of the large claws. It pierced straight through him and into the ground underneath. The creature quickly turned its attention toward the guy with the light. He started to turn and run before the creature grabbed him the same way it had grabbed me. It swung him back and forth before slamming him into a tree. I screamed in horror as the creature then picked up his lifeless body and pulled it toward its face. Its mouth opened like a flap, revealing a circular mouth filled with multiple spiraling rows of teeth. It pulled the lifeless man close. Then its mouth seemed to extend out a few feet in a bizarre fashion. It devoured the man in what felt like less than a minute. The woman made her way to me and helped me to my feet. The creature picked up the other man's body and prepared to eat him as well. The woman helped me walk toward the house. She told me that the creature was injured, and wouldn't chase after us. I didn't know if she was just saying that to calm me down though. When it felt like we were at a remotely safe distance, I had to stop for a moment. I puked on the ground next to me as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. I forced myself to continue walking with the aid of the woman, and we made it into the house. I couldn't catch my breath. I was sobbing. She was holding it together much better than I was. It took a minute for me to realize that I had just unintentionally gotten 2 of her family members killed. I started apologizing profusely despite not knowing exactly what had happened. She continuously said, "Relax, and, it's not your fault." I babbled in my panic. I screamed, "They were trying to help me. It's my fault." The young woman introduced herself as Lily. She was a pretty girl, probably in her mid-20s, wearing old-timey looking clothes. She assured me that she didn't believe it was my fault. I had no way of knowing what was lurking down that road. I still felt an insurmountable amount of guilt. I wanted to save an hour or so on my drive. So I trespassed on clearly posted property. She said that we would talk once I calmed down. She got me a glass of water and a few painkillers for my ribs. I was cut open on each side, but the cuts weren't too deep. I would find out later I had multiple cracked and bruised ribs. The physical pain was so far in the back of my mind though. I felt that I had gotten 2 men killed. I was still trying to understand what that thing was. Lily was very pleasant to me. She was very kind, especially considering the circumstances. It turned out that the 2 men were her uncles. I again apologized upon learning that, but she again told me that I wasn't at fault. "We've always known the risks of living here," she said. "You couldn't have known. They also could have done a better job of warning you. If someone was chasing me with a shotgun and screaming, I would have run too." "What is that thing?" I asked. "How long has it been there?" "It's been there longer than I've been alive," Lily replied. "It saved my granny years ago when she was in trouble. She believed that she had a bond with it. Granny passed last year. She bought this land years ago after discovering the creature. She did everything she could to deter anyone from coming here. She never wanted to report it to any agency though. She felt that it had just as much of a right to live as we do. She claimed that it wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but would protect itself if it felt threatened." I wanted to ask follow-up questions, but I sat quietly and listened to Lily. "We have never known if the creature is a new species, an experiment of some sort, or even an alien. We know that it's been injured for years and doesn't move far from its spot. It seems to need the water to survive like a fish. It manages to get everything it needs from the swamp. We give it treats here and there and our leftovers, but it seems to survive just fine without us. It has been for over 40 years. That's why your family didn't sign off on the highway." "Yes," she replied. "The creature saved Granny, and she knew it would be killed and most likely experimented on if she told anyone about it. Granny was nervous about people anyway, so it was easier to just keep it a secret. I've always known the risks. My uncles did too. I'm so sorry." I repeated again. "Don't be," she softly replied. "Just relax and get some rest. I'll answer all your questions in the morning." "Thank you. Would you like to watch a movie?" she asked. I was a little surprised they had a TV, let alone movies. "Yes, we have movies," Lily laughed. She popped in Jurassic Park and I tried to relax as the painkillers started to kick in. She watched the movie with me for a while before heading to bed herself shortly before Dennis steals the dinosaur embryos. I eventually was able to fall asleep and slept soundly until the morning. It wasn't before I looked out the window about 50 times, trying to catch a glimpse of the creature again. The morning came and I felt as though I'd been hit by a train. I could smell bacon and realized that Lily had cooked breakfast. I was grateful, but still uncomfortable being treated so nicely by someone whose family members I essentially got killed. I hoped for a brief moment that it had all been a dream. I thought about the work meeting and presentation that I was missing, but I couldn't even begin to force myself to care. Learning of the existence of this creature is so mind-blowing that going to work felt so insignificant. I saw another glass of water and another painkiller on the stand and promptly took it. I then got up, ready to go change my tire. Lily walked into the living room. She insisted that I eat breakfast before I go. I agreed with little resistance. I had already missed work. Once I get cell service, I'll probably have 30 missed calls. It's tough to care much about that though. I sat down at the kitchen table with Lily. I wanted to ask more questions about the creature, but I wasn't sure if it was a sore subject that I should avoid. I didn't have to ask though. It isn't a vengeful creature, she said abruptly. Do you feel safe living near it? I asked. It's obviously dangerous. It's just an animal like the rest of us, she replied. Maybe it's something left over from a forgotten era. Maybe it's something new. It keeps to itself unless someone bothers it. It protects itself like anyone else would. Who are we to decide what gets to live or die? Granny hated hubris, and hubris is a very human trait. Humans kill rodents and pests because they're a nuisance. We kill animals for food or even sport. We cage anything that might be a threat to us. Maybe we aren't meant to be the dominant species anymore. Maybe those swamp creatures are. It may have been the pain medication talking, but I found myself agreeing with her. Do you care about that thing? I asked. I care about Granny, and she cared about it. She softly replied. Granny felt bad about stopping the highway from being built. It isn't fair to stop progress to protect our own comfort. We had a good run, but maybe the world isn't ours anymore. We finished breakfast and I went outside to change my tire. I walked up to my car to find that my tire was already changed. Of course it was. The inbred cannibal changed it for me. The same one whose family tried to stop me from walking into certain death. Who died to save me. I felt like I owed Lily so much. She's all alone now because of me. Well, I guess not all alone. I knew that I wouldn't report seeing the creature. Maybe I'll tell the story to people who won't take it seriously anyway, but I won't call the authorities. I owe her that much. She walked out the front door and I thanked her for helping me yet again by changing my tire. I thanked her again for everything she had done for me, for forgiving me. Are you sure you're comfortable being alone here? I asked. The creature isn't going to harm me. It was simply protecting itself, and protecting its own. She said. Yeah. Wait. What do you mean by that? I asked, confused. Lily went inside for a moment. When she returned, she had a photograph. I looked at it and the hairs on my neck stood up. I asked her, are those eggs? Lily smiled from ear to ear and said, she's gonna be a mama. I didn't know how to respond. I initially tried burying the thought in the back of my mind. I gave Lily a hug and we said our goodbyes. I started driving back the way I came along the dirt road, now content to go the long way. It probably takes hundreds of years for those creatures to grow to adulthood. She said that one had been there for decades. I won't even be aware of them in my lifetime. At least that's what I keep trying to tell myself. I reached the end of the dirt road. I stopped and looked back for a minute, blown away by the experience, terrified of what's to come. My phone started going off as I reached cell service. I'm gonna get fired. It's likely that no one will believe my story, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's just the way things are meant to be. People will likely continue spreading rumors about the inbred cannibals living in the swamp. Doesn't really matter though. What matters is to heed the warning when someone tells you to stay the fuck away from the Bead Ranch. Third story. This story was shared by Big DDDY Corn Beef. My GF always had a crippling fear of skinwalkers. So, I met my girlfriend, let's call her Kay, about 2 years ago. She's currently pregnant with our first child and we were happy. We were finally having the little family both of us had always dreamt of. But let me back up. Shortly after I met her we were talking about our biggest fears. Me, I'm afraid of heights. Hers. Wendigo. Skinwalkers. She's always been wildly superstitious about them, no speaking their name or whistling at night, sprinkling salt, burning sage, etc. As ridiculous as I truly thought this was, I put up with it. We all have our silly superstitions. I crush up egg shells to keep the witches away myself because that's what my mother always taught me. I remember one night when, shortly after finishing up a co-op game we were playing together on the Xbox, I went to grab another beer and whistled the theme song to that game as I opened it, and I returned to our bedroom to see her bawling on the bed. I truly didn't do this intentionally and did my best to comfort her as I was met by her yelling at me and shoving me away. So we just went to bed and I decided to take it a little more seriously from then on out. We went on and never mentioned that situation again, but on my 23rd birthday we went out to a steakhouse to have dinner. When we arrived home around 10 o'clock or so I could have sworn I saw a tall, pale white figure dash into the woods behind our house, our dog, Odin, a stout black pit bull, growling and standing at attention looking in its direction. I mentioned it to her as she didn't see it, and all the color drained from her face and begged me to just get in the house. So we go inside, let the dog in, and she was upset for the rest of the night. I was sure it was just a trick of the brain. I was tired, I worked 12-hour shifts, I knew I was just seeing things as I frequent horror channels on YouTube in my spare time. We never encountered anything like that again, but Kay just kind of seemed distant. She never was the same from that night on, being short in conversation, staring off into space, getting angry about tiny things. Last night I woke up to what sounded like scratches on the window. Again, figured it was just a trick of the brain. I got up to use the bathroom and grab a cup of water. The cup of water flew from my hand as I heard a blood-curdling scream from outside coming from the woods. It was her voice. Screaming my name, screaming for me to come help her. I ran to the bedroom and Kay was right there. Sitting straight up in the bed, staring at me with a soulless expression. Not fear. Not sadness. Completely blank. Then she made eye contact with me, and made the same whistle I made that night despite never being able to whistle before, smiled at me, and said, "Don't go out there. Stay here with me. Protect me." In almost a mocking tone, that sick smile not faltering. I laid in bed horrified, didn't sleep at all. I don't know what to do. They got her. I know they did. That isn't K anymore. But it wants me to play along or they'll come for me too. I don't know what to do. Fourth story. This story was shared by Chlok44. A Night in the Woods. I was 10 when I started my career as a volunteer dog walker at the local shelter. By the time I was 14, I was an expert at recognizing dog behavior and I was able to deal with some of the most difficult classes. So when I took a very active dog with small dog aggression issues on a long walk next to the forest, no one was questioning my decision. Bradley was an amazing dog and I would adopt him in a heartbeat if we didn't have an older dog at home. I knew that he had a family meeting tomorrow, so I was making sure that if this was our last walk together, I'd make it as special as I can. Walking besides the forest always reminded me of the town legend. I heard from a reliable source, of course, that many years ago a group of people came here and settled down. They made friends with the natives and asked them about the forest. The natives said that the forest was special and sacred and they should not venture inside unless it is absolutely necessary. All was well until a young family went missing. A man of the settlers, his native wife and their young daughter went to the forest and disappeared. The settlers were enraged, especially when natives told them there was nothing to do, that the young family was claimed by the forest and its inhabitants. But the inhabitants had a secret of their own. It is said they summoned their god, an old creature who was forgotten by all except one family. The settlers sacrificed their own blood and walked the trails in the forest to bind their old god into the land itself, to make sure the forest would be safe for them and their descendants. They failed. Legend has it that their god never showed up, but something else did, and it took the entire settlement with it. It was supposed to be an old story about a boogeyman in the forest and how Jesus Christ is the only God we should pray to. Yet, every year at the equinox a bunch of people gather and walk the trails around the forest. They talk and gossip and occasionally lose a drop of blood in some places. The entire town gathers to escort them to their path and the entire town throws a party when they come back. It is one of the most cherished town traditions and it is always a huge party. Other than that, the forest is woefully boring. We have an occasional missing person, an occasional corpse, we had some drowned college kids in the lake, but nothing that would say sacrifice to the old god or nothing in a certain time period. I myself walked the trails several times with my parents or my sister. It was simply a nice tradition to remember all the people who lived here before and will live here after us. Of course, when I asked what happened to the natives after the settlers disappeared, I was met with a very generic answer. They moved somewhere south and met their end during one of the massacres. I continued to question how we know the legend then, of the summoning of the old god. My own mother shushed me and simply said that maybe someone survived and that I need to stop asking stupid questions. And so I did. I loved the forest, especially when walking next to it. It had the most amazing walking path, wide and well taken care of. I could even take rollerblades and run the dogs on the path if I wanted to. I was thinking about just that when Bradley started barking. That's when I noticed that someone with dogs was walking straight to us. Bradley was especially bad, so instead of making things hard, I decided to make a turn right and walk into the forest. Bradley was so surprised that he didn't complain and simply followed. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon, sunny with a slight wind and the trees were making their swooshing noises. I stopped to pet Bradley, telling him what a good dog he was, when I heard singing. I stopped breathing for a second. It was probably some other walker, singing on the walking path. But it was coming from the other direction, deep into the forest. I turned around and the path was actually quite far already. But one of the trails was right there, so I decided to take the trail and follow the voice. For the life of me I could not understand what it was singing. It must not have been in English, because the further I walked down the trail, the louder the singing became. The trail led me all the way to the lake. It was not a very big lake, more of a pond if I'm honest, but people love to call it the lake. There were a bunch of picnic tables, an old grill, some children's toys and a rock, where you could jump into the lake from. Everyone goes to the lake once in their life, but it was especially known as a teenage makeout spot. Of course, being only 14, I knew fairly little about that. I sat on the bench under a tree, still not very close to the lake, just barely off trail, when I noticed a man walking down a different trail. He was looking very ragged and not dressed for a hike in the forest at all. He also seemed to be following the same song as me. When he came closer to the lake, that's when I noticed her. She was the most beautiful woman I have ever seen in my life. She was also made out of water, see-through, and I'm pretty sure she was the source of the singing. She appeared in the middle of the lake, slowly ascending from the depths, her hands outstretched and inviting. As soon as I saw her, I knew she was singing. I also knew she was not here for me. The song enveloped me as a blanket, poking and prodding until it finally left me as a wind that was blowing 1 second and then just died out the next. I could not move a muscle or scream or do anything. Bradley cowered under the bench, and he was the only thing I felt after the song left me cold and shivering. The song was becoming quieter for me, but seemingly not for the man. The woman, now fully erect, walked above the lake to the man, who was walking toward her. They both had their arms stretched out until they finally met on the beach. He was on land and she was on lake, touching each other. She leaned over for a kiss, and for that she stopped singing. That's when the man woke up and screamed. But it was far too late. His hands disappeared into hers, and she slowly dragged him onto the lake. She was still floating above the lake, enveloping the man with her own body. She seemed to have grown enough to fully devour the man who seemed to have been drowning inside her. I was speechless. And absolutely terrified. The whole forest went quiet and I saw the woman turn toward me. At that moment I knew I would die. She would call me. She has called that man, and I would drown in her body just as she did. And I couldn't do anything. My body was not moving and I felt tears streaming down my face. I was terrified, and Bradley was whimpering under the bench. She came as close as she could while staying on the lake and smiled at me. Her face was absolutely angelic while her body was drowning the poor guy. She put her fingers on her lips, implying me to be quiet, and slowly descended back underwater. I don't know how long I sat on that bench. When I looked up, it was dark and the full moon was reflecting over the lake. My tears were drying on my cheek and I just realized I could move. I ran. I forgot about Bradley and his leash, I just ran. I missed the wandering trail and just ran to what felt like the right direction of home. I could hear Bradley running with me for a while until he ran ahead of me and just disappeared into the darkness. I stopped to catch my breath when I heard talk. I turned around so fast that my neck hurt. I walked toward the chatter and saw a soft glow. It could have been a search party. I had been gone for a while and my parents would be worried. But as soon as I saw them, I put my hands on my mouth in order to stop myself from screaming. 3 women dressed in black, a pyre on the side and a fire circle in the middle, they were chanting and dancing. I stood there with my mouth covered, unable to move for the second time today. They were absolutely mesmerizing. I have no idea what they were saying, but the fire was dancing with them and the land shook when they stopped. They laughed and pointed in the middle of the circle when it started to crack. Steam was rising from the crack and it got bigger and bigger. These women were ecstatic and jumping up and down. I took a step back and hit a tree, but I could not avert my gaze. A long hand appeared from the crack. Long black skinny hand grabbing the earth to pull itself up. I had had enough, so I turned around to quietly run away, but even that was blocked by yet another sight. Flames were bright enough to illuminate a big monster standing in my way. 8 feet tall, humanoid but wrong looking, like his features were too long to be right. His arms were like ape arms reaching all the way to his knees. It didn't notice me as it was entranced with the women in front of him. I prayed to the old god, the new god, to the moon and the stars that it wouldn't notice me. It was entranced by the witches. But as the creature from the crack clawed its way out, steam was pouring out more and more. The monster in front of me got jittery. It turned its head and noticed me. I stayed still. It took a long look at me and then looked at the witches. It turned toward me again as if it was thinking about who was easier prey. It opened its mouth and I saw row after row of sharp teeth. That's when it uttered a word. Hungry. It jumped. It was so quick it was like it just disappeared. 1 second it was in front of me and then it was just gone. Screaming was what finally got me looking at the flaming circle again. I only saw 2 women now screaming and pointing at something in a tree, but it was too far and too dark for me to see exactly what they were pointing at. But the creature in the flame circle did not care. Several hands were out and the circle was half gone, clearly expecting something bigger to appear. But it was also closing fast and hands were disappearing one after the other, until just one very long one remained. The remaining 2 women weren't watching, but I was. The long black arm shot out as fast as a snake and grabbed one of the women. It started to pull her through what little of the hole remained and it was pulling her fast. As soon as the last woman noticed, she screamed and ran to her rescue. She tried to grab her hands, trying to stop her from being pulled down, and I guess it helped a bit. Maybe, just maybe she could be fast enough to stop her friend from going through fully, so only the black hand would be trapped in what was left of the hole. But the black hand grew claws and pierced through the flesh of the first woman's chest. The screams that followed were horrendous, more of a gurgle than a scream. The second woman fell on her stomach and was now dragged on the forest floor, following the first into the hole. Laughter filled the air. Laughter of creatures that should never walk the earth, laughter that sounded like 1,000 tiny screams, laughter that makes your ears bleed and makes you think of hell. The second woman finally let go when only the arms of the first were visible. She let go and the first woman disappeared. The hole filled up and nothing but a clear circle remained. The last woman standing was hitting the earth with both hands, crying and pleading, half in English, half in a language I did not understand. I'd had enough. I turned away from it all and ran away. I had to be careful, half running and half walking in the dead of the night and only the full moon as a light. Though, I was determined to move away from the craziness of that forest. It was Bradley's bark that saved me. It must have been at least a few hours since I last saw him, but I heard his bark as clear as the bell and I followed it. Bradley was waiting for me on a clearly marked trail and my math teacher was holding his leash. I cried as I ran into his arms knowing I was finally safe. He picked me up as if I was a child, as emotional as I was. He laughed as I cried and demanded to know if I was okay. I couldn't answer. We walked outside of the forest where the whole town was waiting for us. I was gone the entire afternoon and most of the night. We watched the sunrise together, praising God that I was safe. It was several days later before I told my story to my math teacher. He visited me at home to check how I was doing. He was very insistent that I tell him the true story and not what I told everyone else, that I simply got lost. He knew about what I saw. He had names for the creatures: Rusalka, witches, demons, and Wendigo. He made a joke about how some people never even meet one and that I must truly be special to have seen each of them. I sat there, in silence, wishing that I just had a vivid dream and that my teacher was making an elaborate joke. I planned to never step foot in that forest to forget that I was ever in it. It worked for a few months. But just yesterday I got the invitation to participate in the oldest town tradition and to play the role of the bride of the forest during the traditional trail walk. I'm scared. I want to run away. But forest surrounds the town and there is no way out. Fifth story. I believe what I saw was a Wendigo. Hello, Dr. Sebastian, I would like to speak with you. That is what a cold voice said to me over the phone. The voice then explained that there was a family who needed food to be delivered to them, and I then asked why she asked me an astrophysicist. She then replied with, "We would really like you to deliver, or at least purchase food for them." I could not say no, so I asked her for the location of the family. She gave it to me, and I decided to ask the family what they want when I arrived. I then drove to the location, parked my truck, and entered the small wooden house. When I entered, I got a chilling feeling in my spine. I then drew my firearm, and walked slowly while calling for someone. It was pitch black within the house except the small amount of light entering the house through the curtains. I then walked into their kitchen, and that is when I froze in fear. There it was sitting with its legs crossed, looking at me. It was as tall as me sitting, and I'm around 6 feet 5 inches in height. It had long talons, it was skinny, its skin was gray, and its eyes were almost as white as light, but far less bright. I could see its rib cage, and then it spoke. It said in a child's voice, "Hello, Dr. Sebastian, how are you?" I screamed like a Viking in the midst of war, and shot it 8 times in the heart. Its scream sounded like an Aztec death whistle. I ran back to my truck, and left. I knew that thing is what I spoke to, and I knew if I were to tell my friend, he would show up with his entire team, and they would have been turned into its dinner. That is all I can remember, but the way it looked at me screamed, "I have ascertained your soul, and there is nothing you can do about it." I visited the location 2 years later with my mates. The place was in a horrible state, the wall had scratch marks, there was urine everywhere, and the only thing we could smell was the urine and blood. As I stepped into my apartment I got a weird feeling. My roommate then greeted me. She asked me what I had done, and I told her that I went with her brother and our friends to an old cabin. 2 hours later, while I'm trying to sleep, I hear a tapping noise. It was coming from my window, and I knew something was wrong. My apartment is on the 2nd floor. There are no trees for at least 10 to 20 meters, and most trees in the area are short. I did not even dare to move, and then my roommate came into my room. "CB, do you have toothpaste? Because I have run out," she said. She then looked at the window, and the tapping speed increased. "Don't move," I said. After 2 hours, the sound stopped, and we both slept in the living room.